Hello everybody, I am Jarrett Ross, the GeneaVlogger, and on today's vlog, I will be building Mr. Beat's family tree using only his DNA results. Hello everybody, welcome to season 2 of my new series, YouTuber Family Trees. On the first season, we looked into Sam Arono's family tree, which I'm going to be linking up above somewhere, the playlist where you can watch that if you haven't yet. But on this season, we're going to be looking at Mr. Beat's
I am just a guy of whom several refer to as Mr. Beat
family tree, and we're only going to be using DNA. Mr. Beat is an educational YouTuber who focuses on videos about history, politics, geography, and other subjects related to the fact
I teach 7th grade social studies, and I love it.
When I first emailed him, I was a bit worried that he might not be interested based on his DNA results video.
A day or so ago, I was like, it'd be fun to reveal those live on the air and kind of talk a little bit about, what genealogy even means before I look at my own results. And some of you have been already guessing what my genealogy is in the chat, and that's wonderful. I am not necessarily that excited to see this. In fact, I couldn't care less. I consider myself an American. I consider myself a human. I am a human. I'm not another species. I just don't care. It does fascinate me a little bit how much people focus on their dead relatives, and how much that means to them, to their identity. I've always been fascinated by it, but never personally, I just don't. These people died a long time ago.
But I was very happy to see that he quickly responded that he was interested. Now, for a lot of people that don't really know much about me, I actually work as the lead forensic genetic genealogist at DNA Labs International. And my job consists of taking DNA results from violent cases or unknown remains, and then using genetic genealogy to identify who the person was. So sometimes I'm identifying violent perpetrators, and sometimes I'm identifying unknown remains. And this is really new in forensic science, and this is something that a lot of people don't know a lot about, but they hear a whole lot about it because so many cases are now being solved using it. So this series is going to give you a very detailed look of what actually goes on in these types of cases when it comes to the genetic genealogy. One of the biggest things I see that people say when they're not sure of how to think about this stuff is, well, what does law enforcement get to see? What do the people doing this work get to see? A lot of people have some very realistic and reasonable worries about government having more access to more information about people. So on this series, you're going to get to see what do we actually see when we do these law enforcement cases looking for violent perpetrators and trying to identify unknown remains. So on this series, I'm actually going to be limiting myself to what we get. So a lot of people know about databases like Ancestry, MyHeritage, 23andMe, Family Tree DNA, then there's stuff like GEDmatch and a whole bunch of other websites as well. But when it comes to forensic genetic genealogy, or what's also known as investigative genetic genealogy, we are limited to basically 2 databases, technically 3. The 2 main databases are Family Tree DNA and GEDmatch. And then technically there's this third website called MitoY-DNA, which does mitochondrial and Y chromosome DNA. But most of the time we're using Family Tree DNA and GEDmatch. So that is what I'm going to be limiting myself to. Now, Mr. Beat actually tested originally on Ancestry, so I had to make sure not to look at his results and to go ahead and upload that to Family Tree DNA and GEDmatch. Now, one other thing that I'm keeping in mind too is that, I already know his name is Mr. Beat. I know he's Matt Beat. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take that into consideration as something that we already would know for a case, which sometimes in some cases we do have names or surnames that are possibly connected to the DNA that we're working on. So sometimes maybe in Doe cases, there may be some possible presumed names that the person might be. So we're keeping those in mind when we look at things. There's also the possibility that sometimes when doing DNA cases, someone has done a Y-DNA search or a surname search and identified possible surnames within the family. So because it'd be very difficult for me to ignore any matches that might have the Beat name in their family tree, we're just going to assume that for whatever reason, we already have the name Beat as a possible name for the DNA results. So the first thing that we do is we want to look at the DNA matches to really see how good are the matches. If the matches that we have are really, really low, we may not be able to figure this out. If we have matches that are very, very high, we may be able to figure out in almost no time. For Matt, his was actually right in the middle. We had some decent matches, mostly right around the 150s, and then we had a lot below that, but nothing really above that. I will say, literally just yesterday before I started, getting ready to film, we did get a new match who was 327 centimorgans. And so I actually did kind of add her into the other information that we did build already. So we have some really good matches. And as I mentioned, we had one new match that popped up yesterday. We can see that it even says new. And this is the highest match. And we're getting 327 centimorgans, longest block of 50 centimorgans, which is really significant. And then they are estimating about a first to third cousin, and that could range. So when we hover over it, you can see that it even pops up first to third cousin, could be a great half uncle, aunt, niece, nephew, or great grandparent or grandchild relation. So one thing that we do want to do is we want to basically split everything into clusters. And there are a few ways to do that. One way is you can connect these results to a website known as Genetic Affairs. We can also do what's known as the Leads method, which is basically color coding different matches based on how their shared matches are to you as well, or to the DNA that you're processing. And once we break it into clusters, then the assumption is that each cluster is going to have one shared ancestor that then Mr. Beat would also descend from. Another thing to note is that because Mr. Beat is male, we know that any matches that share X chromosome DNA with him have to be through his mother's side, because he only inherited X chromosome DNA from his mother, and instead of an X, he got Y chromosome from his father. So when we look at the top matches, the second top match is actually 58 centimorgan match on the X chromosome, and that is significant. So we know that this match, at the very least, is coming through not just his mom's line, but we can say through the X chromosome related paths. And the basic idea of it is, through knowing how the X chromosome is inherited, you can then rule out certain branches of the tree. So like we just ruled out Matt's father, well, it'll be through his mother's side, and it could be through his mother's father or his mother's mother. But for his maternal grandfather, we know that it's not going to be through his maternal grandfather's father's side. It's going to be through his maternal grandfather's mother's side. So it lets you rule out separate branches. And in going through the information on GEDmatch, a lot of the matches were actually the same people. There were a few others who weren't the same, but they were run by the people who were running matches who were already on Family Tree DNA. So there's not going to be a whole lot different that we're going to be able to use from GEDmatch necessarily, but it could possibly be helpful just because we don't know which match might be on there and have great information. With all of the matches on GEDmatch, his top matches, none of them supplied a family tree. That's what this column is, except for down here, which is the not very close, 47 centimorgans, shared DNA with a 19.6 centimorgan segment. So basically we're looking at pretty distant relation, and so that's going to be a really difficult one to be helpful. So for GEDmatch, we're not really getting as much as we are with Family Tree DNA, and this is something that we deal with commonly with a lot of cases. I often find Family Tree DNA usually has the better matches, but not always. There have been a few cases I've done where, you know, we had good matches on Family Tree DNA, but the one match that connected everything was on GEDmatch. So in taking our top 7 highest DNA matches, we have 327, 164, 160, 156, 151, 142, and 113. Then we do have others that are close, right under 100, but we're just going to keep it kind of simple. So from all of these DNA matches, trying to split them into clusters, it's split up actually fairly easily. We have one cluster of 5, we have another cluster of 1, and another cluster of 1. So our 5 includes that 327 centimorgan match. So we know that's going to be the first family we want to focus on, because as soon as we figure out the family, we'll be able to create a what are the odds tree, which we're going to jump into very soon. Then once we do that, we'll want to look at the other clusters, because we'll want to see more distant matches they have and see, can we identify surnames that are common among those families? Because if we can, then we'll want to focus on that. So starting out, we're going to take that first cluster, and on Family Tree DNA, luckily we have people that have supplied family trees for us. So you click that button to see their family tree, and that's not the cluster we're talking about. This one is the cluster that we're talking about. So when we click this family tree, the family tree comes up. And so here we have the family tree comes up, and we get a whole bunch of names. But we know for this match, going back, this match is 160 centimorgans, so about a second to third cousin relation. So going back to this family tree, a second cousin means that you share great-grandparents, third cousin means you share second great-grandparents. So we would hope that the family tree is traced out to second great-grandparents. So there's a possibility that one of these couples listed here is going to be an ancestor couple of Mr. Beat. So we have these couples, Brown and Hill, Leapst and Rogers, Moorhead and Ogle, and Barnes and Liggett. Then we go back and we look at, do the other ones supply a family tree as well? And one of them do, the lowest one at the 113. So we're going to pull up what family tree she has. And so when we look at this family tree, we need to see, is there anything matching? And well, look at that, we do. We have that Leapst and Rogers family again. So Leapst, Rogers, we have Casper Erasmus Leapst and Neppy Luberta Rogers. And we look over here and it's the same couple. And so we see that one is descending from their child Ethel, the other is descending from their child Margaret. So now we have identified the ancestors of this cluster. The other members of this cluster didn't supply family trees through this, but now that we have this family tree, we're going to build it out and we're going to see, can we identify those people? So here we have a basic family tree. We know that Mr. Beat is matching a descendant of Margaret and Mr. Beat is matching a descendant of Ethel, and they are the children of Casper and Neppy. So the main thing we're going to do now is we're actually going to be building the family tree down, not up. And by down, we mean we're going to look at Margaret and Ethel's siblings, their children, their nephews, their grandchildren, and we're going to build that down. Part of what we're doing is as we build down, we want to try to see, can we identify the other names that are matching and see how they're connected. And as I discussed in the last season, when it comes to doing work in the family trees, especially like Ancestry, MyHeritage, ones where they give you hints and stuff, the best way to do it is first you start with the hints, then you go into searching if needed, and then you go into researching. Luckily, in the modern day of age, we can do that and get very far. Whereas in the past, you didn't really even have the internet. You had to go to libraries, family history centers, pull out microfilm, microfiche, and go through things one by one, open up old books, go through all of that. That is still common in today's genealogy, but not as much. And especially when it comes to genetic genealogy, we have to do what's called building quick and dirty trees. Now, by quick and dirty trees, I mean that we're going to try to build these trees using other trees in Ancestry. Now, when we do true research, you don't want to do that. You don't want to just add other information that people have built out. You want to verify it before adding it in. And while we will be going through and verifying things as best as we can, we want to do it quick, because when it comes to this kind of research, you have to build a lot of family trees and find the connections between them. And so being a little loose with it is sometimes not a bad idea. So we're going to jump into that, and we're just going to go right into, we have the Ancestry hints, and we're going to look at other people's trees. And there's a whole lot. We have all these photos. So we know that we are dealing with people that know this family, are descended from this family. And another thing is we can look at the family trees and see, are any of the trees on Ancestry with these people, do they have the same names of the matches in our cluster that we don't know how they're connected? Because if they do, then we can look at that and assume that is the same match, and then we know how they're connected. So looking through these matches, we have a whole lot of stuff, and none of these names actually match the names in the family tree DNA or GEDmatch list. But what we can do is we can then go through and start adding everything in. So what I'll do, I'll choose all 3 of them, and I noticed that 2 of them have the same picture and one has a different one. So that's telling me that we're probably dealing with actual descendants, not necessarily tangentially related people, which doesn't really change the veracity of the tree necessarily, but it can give a bit more confidence sometimes, especially when you're dealing with closer relations where you would assume the people that are making the trees actually knew the people that we're putting in this information from. So we're just adding in all of this information for the most part, trying to kind of leave the names out of it. And, quick and dirty, we're just kind of adding it in. One thing we do want to remember, though, is, if we think that we don't have a person in here, when it says, if we're going to add it, it's adding a whole new person. We want to make sure, is this a new person or not? Because we do have a sibling, Margaret. So we want to make sure when we if we see another Margaret, we don't want to duplicate it, and then it makes things a little bit more difficult. So there we go, Margaret. She's already in there. Wow, they have a whole lot of information. Definitely going to add that in. And so now we're starting to build this tree. And so what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to build that family tree out and down, and we just do this trying to get every single branch of the family that descends from that couple that we identified. I believe the names were Casper and Neppy. There we go. They popped up. So let's go back to the tree. And so now we have a whole lot more. And so what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to build all of this out because the presumption is Mr. Beat descends from Casper and Neppy. Now, I already did a lot of this work. And once you do the work and you identify all those people, you can do what's known as creating a what are the odds tree. This is a tool that was created by a genetic genealogist named Leah Larkin. It's hosted on DNA Painter. What are the odds is a tool where you can put in multiple matches from one family tree, building out the tree, and then get a better idea of where is the person that's matching all of those family members, where are they located within that same family tree. So here we have the family tree that I've created, and I'm just going to point out a few things. This is using the version 2 tool. The version 2 tool is the newest one, and basically that allows a little bit more going on. The calculations are a little different. And then you can also enter birth years, which will change how the hypothesis is created. So I just put in Mr. Beat, Leapst, Rogers, because we know that, both Casper Leapst and Neppy Rogers, but there is the possibility maybe it's from more distant than that. Entering the birth year, 1981, which I do know if you go to Mr. Beat's, I don't know if he has a Wikipedia, but he has a Wikitubia, and I think that's where I got it. So we put that in, and then we put in all of the children, and now I've already put in the hypothesis, done suggested hypothesis, but I'm going to go through, let's delete some of this stuff, and we're going to redo that suggest hypothesis. Okay, so now I've deleted all of that kind of extraneous stuff, and this is the base of what I've built. So we ended up having 6 matches in total, one of whom came from GEDmatch, and this is how they all fit in. So I just went through, I entered in the information, I put birth and death dates because that will be important in determining where does he fit in this family tree. And once you put that in, you just hover over and this stuff pops up, and you can add in details for the birth years, death years, all of that, if you've had it. Now, I've left out some just because of privacy, and I'm going to be saying that a lot through these series. So we have all of this, and now what we do is we suggest hypothesis, and that's the beauty of the version 2 tool. because it basically just enters in everything for you, and then I'll go through and clean it up. So we do suggest hypothesis, and boy, does it give us a whole lot. So one thing that I don't like is it will enter in the about for a lot of previous ones, even if you already have certain information. So I'll go through sometimes and kind of clear it out. So from here, I kind of want to analyze what's likely, what's not, what can we clean up to get a better idea of what's going on in this what are the odds analysis. Well, thank you so much for checking out this video. I do hope that you enjoyed. If you did, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. That really does help me out. As well, if you'd like to get access to my content early, or even more, get access to exclusive content, please be sure to become a patron of mine on Patreon. And not only will you get access to all of that exclusive and extra content, but you'll also be helping support my channel. If you'd like to subscribe, you can click right about here to do so. It's completely free. And you can also follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at GeneaVlogger. I'm the GeneaVlogger. I'll see you in my next video.